rocket and tunnel attacks from Hamas. And as a result of its operations, Israel has already done significant damage to Hamas's terrorist infrastructure in Gaza. I've also said, however, that we have serious concerns about the rising number of Palestinian civilian deaths and the loss of Israeli lives. And that is why it now has to be our focus and the focus of the international community to bring about a ceasefire that ends the fighting and that can stop the deaths of innocent civilians, both in Gaza and in Israel.
It is no longer just a regional conflict. This is not in any stretch of the imagination a lingering disagreement. What is happening in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas needs to be called what it is, a war, and a bloody one at that, claiming innocent lives. The United Nations has weighed in, now accusing Israel of multiple violations of human rights and humanitarian laws for the killing of Palestinian civilians. Israel is fighting back and would seem to be losing the global perception and the war a little more every single day. Welcome into MidPoint, the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel, a modern settlement named after an ancient city from the Hebrew Bible. Founder and president of the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, David Rubin, joins us. Mr. Rubin, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you. Good to be with you.
Let me get your reaction, first of all, to what is at the top of the news right now. The United Nations accusing Israel of war crimes, killing civilians, shelling houses and hospitals during its 2-week-old offensive. There is also mounting pressure globally for Israel to halt the war. Would you first, of course, please, knowing the land, knowing the history as well, react to the charge of war crimes?
Well, I think people have to be very careful when they use a term like war crimes. What I call war crimes is the Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists hiding their missiles, their missile launchers, hiding their weapons, hiding their bomb factories in schools, in hospitals, and in people's homes. This has been going on for years. Nobody says anything about it. It's terribly shocking, and it is indeed a war crime. So I think people have to be very careful about what they say, even if it's President Obama and John Kerry, who are magnificent at speaking out of both sides of their mouth. On one hand, they say Israel has a right to defend itself. On the other hand, and in the same breath, they say that they're very concerned about civilian casualties and war crimes and all this other nonsense. For 5 years, or 6 years already, Israel's hands have been tied behind its back because of United States pressure, because of pressure from the Obama administration that does not want Israel to retaliate, not to Islamic Jihad, not to Hamas, and not to Iran. And I think that there comes a time when a country has to defend itself. Finally, Israel is defending itself, and I hope that that will continue.
We continue to hear, and we have had strategists here and analysts as well, former members of the CIA, who have told us that beyond the shadow of a doubt, there are missiles being stored in hospitals, in homes, in schools, that there is absolutely no doubt in the intelligence community's mind of what Hamas is doing in using their own people as human shields. However, when I say that, it would seem that the world is not seeing the message. What they are seeing are crushed hospitals. What they are seeing is over 600 Palestinians dead and only a few, on a relative scale, Israelis. So then, knowing that the media is covering this, knowing that we see the destruction going on in the Gaza Strip, how then is Israel supposed to fight the public opinion war here when there are members of the world community and now the UN seeing the same images, supposedly many people knowing the same intelligence, yet they are holding Israel responsible?
Well, I don't think that Israel has to play an unfair game. When you're dealing with the left-wing media, you're going to get biased reports. That's a given. Unfortunately, Israel is being faced with this, and it's expected to play a game that's just unbalanced. I want to ask people this question. I want to ask every one of your viewers this question. During World War II, when the Allies were fighting against the Nazis, did they complain when the Nazis were being bombed? Did they complain when Dresden and Berlin were being bombed? There comes a point when you're fighting an enemy and you have to respond to the enemy. You have to fight a war. You know, we in the West have forgotten how to fight wars. When you fight a war, you fight to win. and especially when you're dealing with Islamic terrorists who respect no rules of Western civilization, who respect no rules of the civilized world, in fact, and will hide their bombers and hide their weapons behind women and children. There comes a point when a country has to defend itself, and if those civilians who are hiding the terrorists behind them and refusing to evacuate when Israel sends leaflets and text messages and loudspeakers to warn them 48 hours in advance that the Israeli army is coming, they refuse to leave those locations, then obviously some civilians are going to get killed. Okay, welcome to war. Okay, this is the real world, and for 6 years we've remained silent. We've foolishly, I think, allowed the terrorists to bomb our cities, to fire rockets, thousands upon thousands of rockets at Israeli cities, aiming at civilians. We don't aim at civilians. We aim at military targets. If civilians are hurt in the process, well, that is something that unfortunately happens in war.
You brought up the Germans here just a few moments ago. There are a number of people who have used the word Nazi in describing who they believe Hamas is and in putting Hamas on the same level. Listening to you right now, would you be willing to say, or would it be your opinion and those of others, that perhaps Hamas is worse than the Nazis were, that they are on a higher level of evil than what the German machine was at that time?
Hamas is absolutely worse than Nazism. We're talking about a jihadist mentality. Okay, jihad, for those of you or those of your viewers who don't know, jihad means holy war against all non-Muslims, what they call the unbelievers. And what that means is that any Muslim in the Middle East who does not accept second or third class status has to be eliminated. And this is what Hamas believes. All you have to do is look at their doctrine, which comes straight from the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, which believes that Western civilization as a whole should be destroyed. They believe that the Jews are descended from apes and monkeys, not just descended from apes and monkeys, but we actually are considered apes and monkeys in their ideology. And a lot of the preachers have been saying that in recent days. I hear them just across the valley from my home in Shiloh, in the Arab villages. I hear the mosques at 4:30 in the morning, loud and clear on their loudspeakers, saying "Itbach al Yehud," kill the Jews. This is something that's real. We're talking about real people who hear these chants of "kill the Jews." I don't think that's very different from the Nazis, frankly.
Couple of minutes that we have left here. Ben Stein is the former speechwriter for Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. He was on the Newsmax TV network yesterday on the Steve Malzberg Show, where he said, and I'll let you hear it as well, and our audience also, that the elite liberal media is disguising anti-Semitism as just being anti-Israel. Let's listen to this.
Well, I think it's even more basic than that, I'm really sorry to say. I think there's just a certain amount of Jew hatred in the media, especially in the elite media. There's just... we've moved from right-wing anti-Semitism to left-wing anti-Semitism, and of course they try to pretend it's not anti-Semitism, it's really anti-Israel, but it's really anti-Semitism.
Why does this exist, and in your opinion, who is the worst when it comes to being anti-Jewish in the liberal media?
Well, I don't want to name specific names, but the fact is that there is this strange kind of collusion, and I wrote about this in my book, The Islamic Tsunami, Israel and America in the Age of Obama. This strange collusion between the left-wing secularists and the Islamic ideologues. It's very strange that there would be this collusion, but both of those segments of the population want to see the destruction of Judeo-Christian civilization, want to see the destruction of America, and of course want to see the destruction of Israel. Because of that, they have this immediate commonality of goals, and they work together towards that. You would think they'd have nothing in common. The left-wing secularists and the Islamic ideologues who believe in wife beating, who believe in hanging homosexuals in the city square. But nonetheless, there is that commonality of interest, and they unfortunately work together towards those common goals. And one of those goals is the destruction of Israel.
10 seconds. Is John Kerry going to be able to do anything, or is he wasting his time?
Frankly, I hope that John Kerry is wasting his time. He's coming to the Middle East calling for a ceasefire. This is a very common thing. We've been in this before. They call for a ceasefire while Israel is finally winning. Okay, for 6 years, as the rockets were falling, thousands of rockets on Israeli cities.
Okay, we're going to have to stop it there, unfortunately. Mr. Rubin, we're all out of time. We appreciate your time. Please stay safe, and we'll do it again. We thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up next, heartbreaking stories from the American Southwest border.